This image was captured at Massachusetts' Danvers State Hospital in 1871. Catherine Doyle, who is just 9 years old, is the girl you are witnessing. Examine this picture closely, paying particular attention to her eyes, the stiffness of her stance, and the expression that just doesn't belong on a child's face. Everything Victorian doctors knew about the human mind was contradicted by Catherine Doyle. Even after more than 150 years, her case is still unsolved. One of the most unsettling and eerie medical secrets of the 19th century was caught in the picture you are currently viewing. Modern medicine cannot explain what happened to Catherine Doyle. Psychology cannot explain it, and it may never be fully comprehended. However, what you are about to hear is not your typical medical scenario. The story raises concerns about the boundaries of human reality itself. We must go back to the year 1871 inches order to comprehend Catherine Doyle's case completely. Only 6 years had passed since the Civil War ended, and America was still getting over the severe wounds. With so many Irish immigrants escaping poverty and starvation in their native country in search of a fresh start in the New World, Boston was a city undergoing change. It was the earliest, most barbaric period of psychiatric medicine. People who were deemed mentally ill were physically kept concealed from society in the dark, remote places known as asylums. Child growth, psychological issues, and mental illness were not well understood. Anything that didn't conform to social norms was just forgotten or stored away. Among these ominous establishments was the Danvers State Hospital, where Catherine would spend her last years. Constructed atop what had once been Salem Farms, it bore the tainted relics of American past as well as the disgrace of antiquated medicine. Treatments that we would now consider torture have been practiced in the hallways there, including extended cold baths, severe physical restriction, sensory isolation, and dubious medical tests. Catherine Doyle would go on to become one of the most well-known and unsettling cases in 19th century psychiatry because of this restrictive and scientifically constrained setting. It's also critical to realize that, despite their best efforts, the doctors of the era lacked the intellectual and technological means to fully explain what they were seeing. The daughter of Irish immigrants Patrick and Mary Doyle, who had immigrated to America in search of a better life, Catherine Doyle was born in the center of Boston on the 15th of March, 1862. At Boston's bustling port, Patrick was a longshoreman who loaded and unloaded ships carrying cargo from all over the world. Mary cleaned and prepared meals for Boston's wealthy households while working as a domestic in some of the most opulent homes on Beacon Hill. The North End, a largely Irish district where living conditions were insecure, but the community was bound together by Catholic faith, and the common experience of immigration was where the Doyle family lived in a modest 2-room flat. The scent of freshly baked bread from nearby bakeries, the sound of older neighbors speaking Irish, and folk tales her maternal grandmother narrated about old Ireland were all part of Catherine's upbringing. According to every report found in church records and family archives, Catherine was a perfectly typical kid during the first 7 years of her existence. She was lively, inquisitive, and smart for her age, but within the bounds of what was expected of a girl in her time and social background. She assisted with light housework, played with her mother's rag dolls, and went to Sunday Mass at St. Leonard's Church, where she picked up some rudimentary Latin prayers. Catherine's parochial school teachers characterized her as a committed learner who lacked remarkable intelligence. She's shown interest in biblical stories, read and wrote at a typical pace, and interacted effectively with other kids. Nothing in her attitude, demeanor, or development at all hinted to the incredible events that were about to transpire. In subsequent medical interviews, Mary Doyle consistently underlined that Catherine was her sweet daughter, a devoted youngster who enjoyed assisting her mother in the kitchen, and became anxious when her father arrived home from work late. In a life generally characterized by the brutality of urban poverty, Patrick referred to his daughter as the light of our house, a child who gave happiness and normalcy. All of this altered so abruptly and drastically in September 1869 that medical professionals and scholars now disagree on what actually occurred to Catherine Doyle during that fateful month. Catherine woke up differently on the morning of the 14th of September 1869, a Tuesday that would be remembered for the rest of Mary Doyle's life as the day she lost her daughter. Not physically. She looked just like she always had. Curly brown hair, a round freckled face, and the diminutive frame of a 7-year-old girl. But throughout the course of the night, a fundamental alteration had occurred that extended well beyond appearance. The initial indications were faint. Catherine had always been an early riser, so it was unusual for her to get up later than usual. She moved differently when she eventually descended for breakfast. It seemed as though every move had been plotted out in advance. Even more unsettling was the fact that she failed to say "Good morning, Mommy and Daddy" to her parents, which was customary in their household. Rather, Catherine just sat at the table and gazed at her parents with what Mary would later characterize as empty, but at the same time very, very old. Catherine responded to Mary's question about how she was feeling, but her tone had altered. Not spectacular, but noteworthy enough. It was more mature, rougher, and seemed to have come from a much older person. It was impossible to overlook Catherine's change in the weeks that followed. She started to exhibit knowledge that was just not possible for a youngster of her age and social standing. She was remarkably accurate in her casual remarks about historical events over family meals. She talked about the American Revolutionary War as though she had been there herself, bringing up specifics about battles that weren't covered in the elementary school she went to. Catherine started displaying knowledge of ancient Greek philosophy, which was even more unsettling. She cited Aristotle and Plato as if she truly comprehended difficult philosophical ideas, rather than as if she were a young child who had learned sentences by heart. Catherine simply smiled, a smile her parents started to fear, and said she had always known these things when Patrick, perplexed, inquired where she had learned them. Inexplicably, Catherine's religious knowledge also grew. She started reciting entire Bible sections in Latin, including esoteric Old Testament texts that most priests had to consult books for, in addition to the straightforward prayers she had learnt in church. Father O'Brien of St. Leonard's Parish put Catherine to the test, and was astounded to learn that she could talk about intricate theology with the depth of a highly qualified seminarian. The information Catherine displayed about those around her, however, was possibly the most unsettling of all. She was privy to personal facts about family members and neighbors that no one else had told her. In passing, she brought up marital issues amongst local couples, hidden debts, and even moral transgressions that no one seemed to be aware of. It quickly became apparent that Catherine's metamorphoses had far more sinister undertones, even though her impossible knowledge was unsettling enough. In contrast to the pleasant disposition she had displayed during her first 7 years of life, she started to exhibit a macabre interest in death and pain. Catherine started to ask specific, technical questions about execution techniques, medieval torture, and deadly diseases, rather than the typical child's curiosity about mortality. She depicted assassination techniques from ancient cultures, Egyptian mummification processes, and the torture operations of the Spanish Inquisition with startling realism. What was more concerning was that Catherine appeared to like these descriptions. When she talked about suffering, her eyes would light up, and she would smile in a way that sent shivers down the spines of the adults in her immediate vicinity. It was a calculating, almost wicked smile, rather than a child's innocent one. Catherine's relationship with bodily suffering also became unsettling. She started intentionally injuring herself by biting her lips until they were sore, beating her head against walls so forcefully that she left marks, and scratching herself with her own nails until she bled. The most alarming thing, though, was that she didn't seem upset throughout these self-mutilation bouts. Instead, she appeared to be experiencing ecstasy, as though experiencing bodily anguish gave her an unfathomable sense of joy. Catherine consistently discovered methods to injure herself, despite Mary Doyle's repeated attempts to stop these practices. She cut and scratched herself with seemingly innocuous items, such as shattered glass, loose nails in the walls, and even cooking utensils. And when asked why she did this, she only said that something asked her to do it, or that she felt like it. Catherine's attitude toward animals also underwent a significant shift. She had previously been kind to the neighbor's dog and the stray cats that often visited the area. Animals started deliberately avoiding her after the metamorphosis. Cats would run away, dogs would bark, and even birds appeared to fear flying close to her. Catherine's icy smile returned as Mary questioned why the animals behaved in such an odd way. "They know what I am now, Mommy. They're smarter than you." As the months went by, Catherine's case progressed beyond alterations in behavior and cognition. She started to exhibit physical prowess that, given her age and physical makeup, really shouldn't have been possible. Her enormous strength was the first obvious sign. A petite, physically typical girl throughout her life, Catherine suddenly found it easy to break things. In December 1869, she was so furious that she used only her hands to break in half a sturdy oak chair. Examining the shattered chair, Patrick, who worked every day with heavy wood at the dock, was puzzled. It would have taken a great deal of force to break the wood, much more than any toddler could muster. Another time, Catherine permanently etched her finger marks on the family's wooden kitchen table, deep markings instead of superficial scratches, as though her tiny fingers were under the pressure and hardness of metal implements. The marks, which Mary attempted to remove with sandpaper, were too deep and remained as a sobering reminder of her daughter's unfathomable courage. Additionally, Catherine started exhibiting unusual physical resistance. She didn't exhibit signs of weariness or discomfort, even after spending hours in uncomfortable positions. At 2:00 the morning, Mary once discovered her standing in the middle of the living room, staring at the wall, without moving. When asked, Catherine claimed to have remained motionless in that position for over 6 hours, starting from dinner. Catherine's ability to withstand cold was especially remarkable. She often went outside in far less clothes than the weather called for during Boston's severe winter of 1869-1870, seemingly immune to cold that made other locals shudder. On one particularly memorable occasion, Patrick saw her sleeping in the garden, blanketed in snow, dressed just in her nightgown, and displaying no symptoms of pain or hypothermia. The alteration in Catherine's eyes, however, was arguably the most unsettling physical expression. A number of family members and neighbors started remarking that there was something wrong with her eyes. Her eyes had a mesmerizing, even predatory quality, they said. Long-term direct eye contact with Catherine was associated with headaches, vertigo, and an unexplained feeling of terror. Mary observed that Catherine's eyes occasionally appeared to shift hue in response to the light or her emotional state. Usually brown, they occasionally seemed nearly black, especially when she was having her most upsetting episodes. In certain moments, Mary vowed that she could see strange shapes moving in Catherine's pupils, as though someone else was peering into her daughter's eyes. Patrick and Mary Doyle did what any desperate parent would do when Catherine's conduct grew more unsettling and inexplicable. They looked for assistance wherever they could. Since they were devoted Catholics, the church was their first port of call. Catherine had known St. Leonard's Church's father, Timothy O'Brien, since birth. She was one of the cutest kids in his parish, and he had christened her and overseen her first communion. At first, he was skeptical of the stories the Doyles told him when they asked for his assistance. He reasoned that it must be a challenging stage that many kids experience, made worse by the anxious fantasies of devoted parents. When Father O'Brien personally met Catherine during a pastoral visit to the Doyles' home in January 1870, this viewpoint swiftly shifted. He attempted to discuss basic theological issues with the girl. To his surprise, Catherine not only showed a remarkable amount of theological knowledge, but also started challenging core tenets of Catholic teaching, using complex reasoning that he only ever heard from seminarians with academic degrees. To make matters worse, Catherine showed that she was aware of private information that the priest had never disclosed to anyone. She brought up his prior transgressions, his hidden religious misgivings, and even particular incidents from his early years in a little Irish village. In response to the terrified priest's question about how she knew these things, Catherine simply grinned and said that she knew many things about many people. Father O'Brien chose to conduct an exorcism because he was certain he was dealing with something that was beyond the realm of conventional medical knowledge. Only the family and an elderly deacon were present when the rite was performed at the Doyles' home on a night in February 1870. The events of this ceremony were so upsetting that Father O'Brien never discussed it in public, only referring to it in his private journals, which were found decades later. As the most terrifying experience of my entire priestly life, Catherine's reaction to the exorcism was different from what religious manuals advised a possessed person should have. She didn't writhe, scream, blaspheme, or display any signs of pain. Rather, she chuckled, a deep, resonant laugh that sounded as if it were coming from several voices at once. She then started reciting the exorcism ceremony with him, word for word, in perfect Latin, anticipating each line before he even uttered it, much to the priest's utter shock. Following the unsuccessful exorcism, the Doyles looked to medicine in the hopes that science would bring answers that religion had not been able to. One of the few Boston physicians who focused on mental illnesses and had studied in Europe where more sophisticated psychiatric methods were emerging was Dr. Henry Morrison, whom they sought out. A careful man, Dr. Morrison was renowned for his thorough clinical case documentation and exacting scientific methodology. He originally treated Catherine's situation with healthy professional skepticism when the Doyles asked for his assistance, thinking he was dealing with a very bright youngster who might be experiencing psychological trauma. During his initial sessions with Catherine, this viewpoint underwent a significant shift. Over the course of 2 intense weeks in February and March 1870, the doctor examined the girl, carefully recording all facets of her behavior and talents. His findings are genuinely unsettling to read, and they are still preserved in Boston's historical medical archives. Morrison observed almost away that Catherine's intelligence was much above average, but it was focused almost entirely on depressing and gloomy topics. She could explain rare diseases with precise symptomatology, discuss human anatomy with an accuracy that rivaled that of medical students, and even recommend treatments that were at the forefront of medicine at the time. Catherine sketched and wrote all the time during sessions, but her artistic creations were not the conventional flowers, homes, or animals of youngsters her age. Rather, she created intricate pictures of human skeletons that were anatomically accurate, death and decay scenes, and people in excruciating pain. A child without formal artistic instruction shouldn't have been able to create drawings with the technical skill she did. Catherine's essays really captivated Dr. Morrison. She was proficient in a number of languages, including Latin, ancient Greek, and even primitive Egyptian hieroglyphs that she had never learned. Asked where she had learnt these languages, she only said that the words came to her when she needed to use them. However, Catherine's eyes were the thing that most troubled Dr. Morrison. He described in detail the unexplained feeling he experienced when staring at her in his reports. Comparing the sensation to being examined by an intelligence far older and more seasoned than should be present in such a young mind, he said it was extremely uncomfortable. During his checks, the physician also noted a number of physical abnormalities. Although Catherine did not exhibit any symptoms of hypothermia, her body temperature was continuously below normal. Her pulse was steady, yet very slow. More oddly, even when all other environmental factors were the same, plants in his office started to wither when Catherine was there for extended periods of time. On a very chilly night, in February 1870, the incident that ultimately resulted in Catherine's admission to Danvers Hospital took place. Even the most skeptics were persuaded that Catherine needed urgent expert medical attention after this strange and unexplainable experience. At 3 a.m, Patrick Doyle awoke with an odd sense that something was off. Even though it was the height of Boston winter, he observed that the house was too silent and that the air was especially frigid. When he woke up to see how the family was doing, he found Catherine out of bed. After looking all over the home and failing to find her, Patrick noticed a small figure standing in the snow-covered backyard outside the kitchen window. In her thin white cotton nightgown, Catherine stood in the middle of the yard, utterly still. Her body was already partially covered in snow, and she was in the midst of a snowfall that had started during the night. Patrick was most startled by Catherine's posture. She stood with her arms outstretched, almost welcoming the storm. Despite the heavy snow and the fierce winds, she stayed motionless, her head tipped back, staring straight into the night sky. When Patrick rushed outside, he thought his daughter would be severely hypothermic or worse. Upon arriving at her location, he was taken aback to see that Catherine was not shivering or displaying any symptoms of cold-related pain, even though she had been in the storm for several hours. Although her skin felt quite chilly to the touch, she was fully conscious and was breathing regularly. Catherine slowly turned to face Patrick as he attempted to usher her inside. he would be plagued by what he witnessed for the rest of his life. Catherine's eyes appeared entirely black, as though there were no white or iris visible, not just dilated pupils. Furthermore, her voice seemed to emanate from the air surrounding her rather than just her throat when she spoke. She fixed Patrick with those unachievable black eyes and said, "The stars are almost aligned, Father, and when they meet in the correct position, you'll finally understand that Catherine never really existed. She was just preparation for something much more important." Patrick would repeat these words to doctors for the rest of his life. The most difficult choice of the Doyles' lives was made the morning after the backyard incident, following a restless night and hours of frantic deliberation between Patrick, Mary, Father O'Brien, and Doctor. Catherine would be admitted to Danvers State Hospital. The choice was not made hastily. Everyone knew they were dealing with something they couldn't fully comprehend. Father O'Brien acknowledged the inadequacy of his spiritual resources. In order to have any chance of comprehending Catherine's condition, Dr. Morrison acknowledged that he had never encountered a case like this, and that he needed the facilities and resources of a specialized institution. The choice to turn over their only daughter to medical authorities devastated Patrick and Mary on an emotional level. However, they acknowledged that Catherine posed a risk to others in addition to herself. An unsustainable scenario was created by her displays of superhuman power, impossible knowledge, and progressively unsettling conduct. Danvers Hospital was selected because it was regarded as one of the most cutting-edge facilities in New England for the treatment of mental illnesses. The institution had resources for comprehensive medical documentation and had adopted some of the most cutting-edge European psychiatric procedures under the leadership of Dr. Elias Hartwell. Catherine was transferred from her home in Boston to Danvers Hospital on the morning of the 15th of March 1870, precisely 1 year after her 8th birthday. She was fully compliant with the procedure, exhibiting an odd comprehension of the circumstances that was much above her apparent years. Throughout the carriage ride to Danvers, Catherine mostly kept quiet, while gazing out the window with that antiquated expression that had come to define her. Her only comment was, "You're going to try to photograph me, aren't you, Doctor? It will be interesting to see what your camera can capture." She turned to face Dr. Morrison, who was beside her. Constructed in the Gothic Revival style, which dominated institutional design at the time, Danvers State Hospital was a massive and menacing establishment. The main building, which spanned over a kilometer and was situated on hills with sweeping views of the Massachusetts countryside, had arched windows and pointed turrets that gave it a silhouette more akin to a medieval castle than a contemporary hospital. The establishment was founded on the tenets of moral treatment, a psychiatric theory that claimed that patients might be cured by therapeutic labor, regimented routine, and a regulated setting. Theoretically, it was a groundbreaking and compassionate method of treating mental disease. In reality, Danvers Hospital had turned into a holding facility for those deemed too dangerous or incurable by society to live freely. The hospital had over 600 patients in conditions we would now consider appalling when Catherine arrived in March 1870. The metallic clatter of keys and chains, the screams of people in crisis, and the incessant murmur of unintelligible discussions filled the long black halls. Urine, sweat, and human misery were all unsuccessfully covered up by a strong disinfectant odor. Dr. Elias Hartwell, 52, the chief physician of the facility, had devoted his life to the study of mental illnesses. Hartwell, a Harvard University graduate who briefly studied under some of the forerunners of European psychiatry in Paris, saw himself as a forward-thinking scientist who was committed to using exacting observation and recording techniques to expand medical understanding of the human mind. Hartwell anticipated discovering another case of childhood hysteria, or even a developmental issue when Catherine was brought to his office for the required initial assessment. Although he had read Dr. Morrison's papers, he remained cautious regarding the more unusual claims made in them. As a professional, in the initial minutes of his conversation with Catherine, this viewpoint underwent a significant shift. As she walked into his office with a nurse by her side, still in the plain clothes she had worn on the journey from Boston, she showed none of the dread, perplexity, or nervousness that new patients, particularly youngsters, often exhibit. Rather, her eyes scanned the room as though assessing not just the surroundings, but also Dr. Hartwell. Catherine startled Hartwell by providing detailed information on 3 patients who had recently passed away at the hospital before he could even start his usual checkup. She was aware of their whole names, the precise dates of their deaths, and most unsettling of all, detailed information about the events leading up to their deaths, which could only have been found in private medical records that she was unable to access. More startlingly, Catherine showed that she was aware of Dr. Hartwell's private secrets, which he had never disclosed to anybody. She brought up particular incidents from his early years, contentious choices he had made in his career, and even elements of his married life that had strained his union. Catherine only grinned the icy smile that had become her signature when Hartwell, who was clearly terrified, inquired how she knew these things. She said that she had ways of knowing things about interesting people. Catherine was initially assigned to the pediatric wing of the hospital, a comparatively tiny area that had roughly 20 kids with different mental illnesses. Sister Margaret O'Connell, an Irish nun with over 15 years of experience working with troubled adolescents, oversaw the ward and regarded herself as an expert in handling challenging situations. Although not for the reasons the medical team had initially thought, Catherine's presence in the pediatric department soon proved troublesome. Catherine typically followed the fundamental norms of the institution, didn't cause any overt disruptions, and wasn't aggressive with the other kids. In many respects, the issue was more subtle and unsettling than overt acts of aggression. The other kids in the ward were influenced by Catherine in an odd and incomprehensible way. 3 youngsters who had previously been regarded as rather stable cases started exhibiting whole new and unsettling habits within a week of her presence. They stopped engaging in their regular leisure activities, stopped reacting appropriately to inquiries from medical personnel, and sat in silence for hours on end, staring at certain spots on the walls, as though they were seeing something that grown-ups were unable to see. Emma Sullivan, a 6-year-old girl who had been committed because she had been experiencing night terrors after her parents died in a carriage accident, started talking compulsively about a shadowy figure that she claimed was always in the ward. The most unsettling thing was that all of the children who started acting out these odd behaviors described the same figure, the same height, the same appearance, the same specific details about clothing and physical characteristics, as if they were all seeing the same thing, something invisible to adults, but perfectly real to them. Emma described this entity in consistent and specific details. A very tall woman, dressed entirely in black, with long dark hair, that seemed to move even when there was no wind, and eyes she described as dark holes where there should be light. When Sister Margaret saw that these children were also displaying information they shouldn't have, her alarm grew. At first, she attempted to brush these visions off as collective hysteria or overblown juvenile imagination. None of them had ever been to the Doyle family home in Boston, but they talked about things that happened in Catherine's life prior to her admission, including specific talks she had with her parents. Suddenly, a 9-year-old kid called Timothy Chen, the son of Chinese immigrants admitted for selective mutism episodes, started talking fluently about Catherine's early years in Ireland, including anecdotes about family members who had passed away before she was born. How could Timothy be aware of this private information about a family of Irish Americans? How were these children able to obtain such private information? When the kids started acting in unison, as though they were obeying unseen commands, the scenario got even more alarming. They sat in exact geometric configurations at meals, moved in specific formations along the ward corridors, and occasionally talked in unison, reciting words and languages none of them had studied. With increasing concern, Dr. Hartwell began to think that Catherine was influencing other children's conduct in some way using techniques he was unable to identify or comprehend. His in-depth observations revealed patterns of behavior that were beyond the realm of traditional psychiatric interpretations. Dr. Hartwell made the tough choice to move Catherine to a private room in the hospital's isolation area following 6 weeks of close surveillance. The decision was made because of the unexplainable impact she had on other kids and the necessity to conduct a more controlled investigation into her case, not because of any violent or disruptive behavior on her side. Catherine's isolation room was situated away from the main activity areas on the 3rd floor of the hospital's East Wing. It was a 3x4mm Spartan cell with only a metal bucket for personal use, a little wooden table, a basic chair, and an iron bed with a thin mattress. Limited natural light was available during the day through a single small window that was shielded by iron bars. A more rigorous period of monitoring and medical experimentation began with the shift to isolation. Dr. Hartwell was committed to learning more about Catherine's illness and, if at all possible, recording it in a way that would further our understanding of uncommon mental illnesses. Catherine's daily treatment sessions soon took on a peculiar personality. Catherine often took charge of conversations, steering them toward areas that greatly unsettled Hartwell, rather than passively answering the doctor's queries like a normal patient would. She probed deeply into his innermost anxieties, darkest insecurities, and professional and personal reasons. Catherine showed an unsettling aptitude for spotting psychological weaknesses in others and skillfully taking advantage of them. She challenged Dr. Hartwell with a childhood trauma he had never shared with anyone during a particularly memorable session in May 1870, the unintentional drowning of a girl called Sarah Mitchell when they were both 12 years old. Hartwell's memories of the episode were precisely mirrored by Catherine's description, which included details of the day's weather, the exact words that were said, and even the guilt and cowardice that had followed Hartwell ever since. Catherine's use of this knowledge was even more unsettling than her knowledge of the impossible. She didn't just divulge secrets, she used them as exacting psychological instruments to elicit and control the feelings of those in her vicinity. She was able to get Hartwell to doubt not just his professional skills, but even his sanity during their sessions. Dr. Hartwell started painstakingly recording other strange occurrences connected to Catherine's presence. Even when the heating system operated flawlessly and all other environmental factors stayed the same, her room's temperature was constantly 4 to 6 degrees C colder than the rest of the hospital. No matter how well they were cared for, plants near her window would wither and die in a matter of days. Stranger still, a number of medical staff workers who spent a lot of time close to Catherine's room reported having unsettling encounters. Only after they started working in her department did nurses report experiencing intense headaches, unexplained nausea, and frightening dreams. After experiencing persistent feelings of being watched, even when Catherine was obviously asleep, 2 guards asked to be moved to different parts of the hospital. Dr. Hartwell conducted an experimental study program with Catherine in the summer and fall of 1870 that went way beyond the accepted medical practices of the time. He believed that her condition offered a rare chance to greatly improve medical knowledge of the characteristics of the human mind and its potential. Comprehensive examinations of memory, language proficiency, general knowledge, and cognitive ability were all part of the research. Evaluations that are often reserved for adults with advanced degrees, such as difficult logic examinations, philosophical analysis, and in-depth historical knowledge, were given to Catherine. She performed considerably above what might be expected of a youngster of her age and educational background in each of these examinations. In an attempt to determine the origin of Catherine's unbelievable knowledge, Dr. Hartwell also carried out experiments. He showed her ancient historical documents, texts in dead languages, and even images of individuals she could never have known. In each instance, Catherine showed an unexpected level of familiarity with the information that was presented, offering particulars that she would not have been able to find through traditional methods. One experiment that was really eye-opening was showing Catherine a picture of an unidentified man who had passed away in a far-off city 10 years prior. She was able to reveal the man's full name, family information, the cause of his death, and even details about his personal habits and personality without any background knowledge. After conducting further research, Hartwell found that everything Catherine had told him was indeed true. Catherine also started exhibiting what Hartwell referred to as premonitory powers during these tests. She made precise forecasts about the future, all of which came to pass with unsettling accuracy. She made specific predictions about the deaths of 3 hospital patients, including the precise time and circumstances of their demises. Her predictions turned out to be entirely correct in every instance. Catherine's physical state started to deteriorate concerningly throughout the winter of 1871 despite the fact that her mental and magical powers appeared to be growing stronger with time. The decline didn't fit any identifiable medical trends, and it appeared to be related in some way to the unusual symptoms she displayed. Even though Catherine's appetite seemed to be normal, she started to drastically reduce her weight. Her skin became pale and nearly translucent, revealing bluish veins beneath the epidermis. Her hair started to thicken and darken, taking on an almost unnatural appearance that was more like animal fur than human hair. Even more unsettlingly, Catherine started exhibiting hours-long episodes of total bodily rigidity. She stayed perfectly still, like a statue, during these moments and did not react to any outside stimuli. She didn't move, blink, or react when someone spoke to her, but her heartbeat and respiration were still regular. Dr. Hartwell found that the most severe supernatural manifestations occurred during these periods of rigidity. Several medical staff members reported experiencing peculiar physical symptoms, including nausea, dizziness, and the unsettling sensation that something invisible was in the room. The temperature of the room also dropped significantly during these moments, and things moved more often and violently. During these stiff spells, Catherine also started talking, although her voice took on characteristics that were obviously distinct from her typical speech. She occasionally spoke in several voices at once, producing an impossible harmonic effect that made the audience feel lightheaded. At other times, her voice took on intonations and timbres that were obviously adult, as though she were speaking on behalf of other individuals. Catherine disclosed even more precise and impractical details about individuals and occasions during these outbursts. She talked about persons who had passed away decades before as though she knew them personally, discussed historical events that had happened centuries before she was born in great detail, and even made prophecies about the future that always came to pass. During this time, Catherine's forecasts grew especially troubling and accurate. She foresaw the precise dates and locations of natural disasters, the deaths of significant politicians, and even private incidents involving medical staff members. All of her prophecies came to pass, precisely as she had explained. After researching Catherine for over a year, Dr. Hartwell made a choice in May 1871 that would alter our perception of her case for all time. He made the decision to take a picture of her for his medical records. The choice was not made hastily. Depending on who looked at her and when, Hartwell had seen that Catherine appeared to be literally different to different people. She was characterized by some medical workers as a seemingly typical girl who was physically unremarkable, but possibly a touch slender and pale. Others found her appearance to be quite unsettling, an inexplicable trait that made them feel extremely uneasy and nervous. This perceptual fluctuation has been experienced by Hartwell himself. Sometimes, Catherine appeared to be just that, a 9-year-old girl, albeit one who was disturbed and incredibly brilliant. At other times, particularly when she was at her most rigid or when she was displaying her most remarkable powers, there was something about her looks that gave him the impression that he was gazing at something far older and more powerful than a human infant. In order to provide consistent visual proof that could be examined, evaluated, and contrasted over time, Hartwell anticipated that a photograph would accurately depict Catherine's true appearance. Additionally, he believed the picture would provide information about her condition that was not immediately apparent from eye contact. Despite being a relatively new technique at the time, medical photography was quickly becoming a crucial tool for recording mental health problems. In order to identify patients and investigate the relationship between physical appearance and mental health, a number of innovative hospitals used photography to build visual records of their patients. Dr. Hartwell got in touch with James Thornton, a medical portrait photographer who had experience working with a number of Boston-area mental hospitals. Thornton was renowned for his expertise in treating patients in a range of mental and physical conditions, as well as his professional discretion and exact skill. Thornton originally expressed scientific interest in the problem after Hartwell gave him an explanation of the case's nature. Over the course of his job, he had taken pictures of hundreds of psychiatric patients and was used to odd circumstances. Thornton consented to carry out the picture shoot in a controlled environment with specialized gear that would enable the capture of subtleties and small details in the subject's appearance. The morning of the 15th of June, 1871, precisely 15 months after Catherine's admission to the hospital, was set aside for the photo shoot. Because he had noticed that Catherine was usually more cooperative and calmer in the early hours of the day, Dr. Hartwell selected a Thursday morning. At 9 in the morning, James Thornton brought his bulky photographic gear to the hospital, including a large format camera, a solid tripod, glass plates for taking pictures, and all the chemical equipment needed to develop the images on location. He was ready for the typical difficulties, such as agitation, lack of collaboration, or erratic actions, because he had photographed numerous psychiatric patients in the past. But Thornton saw right away that this session was different when he was brought to Catherine's chamber. Despite the time of day and the angle of the windows, the room's lighting appeared odd. As though natural light were somehow being absorbed or warped in Catherine's presence, there was a faint penumbra that seemed to cluster around her. Catherine was seated in her normal chair, dressed simply in a gray cotton frock, which was the hospital's standard uniform for female patients. She was clearly interested in seeing Thornton set up his equipment, but not in the way that children are naturally curious. Rather, she appeared to be assessing the photographer and his equipment with a knowledge that implied a previous experience with the procedure. Catherine was utterly still and silent for the duration of the preparation, which took around half an hour. Thornton observed that she appeared to have an innate understanding of the technical needs of photography, knowing exactly where to look and how to position herself before he even gave her directions. Thornton made last-minute camera adjustments and told Catherine to stare straight into the lens when he was ready to shoot the picture. At this point, something extraordinary occurred, what Thornton would later refer to as the most disturbing experience of my entire professional career. Thornton experienced a strong physical sensation, as though something invisible had passed through him. Just as Catherine turned her eyes toward the camera, he shivered uncontrollably as the temperature in the room plummeted sharply and suddenly. Even worse was the distinct feeling that he was not merely taking pictures of Catherine, but rather something far more extensive and intricate that was somehow related to her or operating via her. In order to get a clear picture using the technology of the time, Thornton turned on the shutter on his camera, exposing the glass plate for about 15 seconds. He kept his gaze on Catherine for those 15 seconds, and he subsequently spoke of the sensation of being photographed by her while simultaneously photographing her. Thornton used the makeshift laboratory he had set up in a nearby room to prepare the photographic plate as soon as the exposure was completed. Thornton was skilled and self-assured in his method, but the photographic development process at the time necessitated exact timing and careful handling of hazardous chemicals. But he sensed something was wrong as soon as he started processing the glass plate. In his decades of photographing, he had never seen the patterns and textures created by the odd reactions of the chemicals. On the plate, the image appeared asymmetrically, with some regions growing rapidly and others remaining stubbornly dark. Thornton and Dr. Hartwell both became silent for a few minutes as they tried to comprehend what they were seeing when the shot was eventually fully developed. The picture that came out of the photographic plate was both exactly what they had been expecting and very different from anything they could have imagined. The picture showed Catherine sitting in the same room, in the same clothes, at the same spot she had been during the session. Every fundamental physical detail was accurate and present. However, there was something very unsettling about the picture that defied logic. Regardless of the viewing angle, Catherine's eyes in the picture appeared to be staring straight at the viewer. Even worse, they appear to have unfathomable depth, as though the picture had recorded the endless layers underneath her eyes in addition to their surface. The feeling that if one looked too long, one may fall into those eyes was noted by observers. It was also unsettling to see Catherine's face in the picture. It was neither quite different nor precisely the same expression she had kept throughout the session. It seemed as though something that was there but often invisible had been revealed by the camera, capturing an emotion that was just a little out of sync with reality. More unsettlingly, Thornton and Hartwell started to notice things that shouldn't have been there when they looked more closely at the picture. The image contained shadows that weren't consistent with the illumination in the room during the session. It appeared as though other presences had been photographed alongside Catherine, as vague and hazy figures appeared to move around the boundaries of the picture. The medical staff at Danvers Hospital was immediately captivated by Catherine's photograph and engaged in heated discussion over it. To review the image and debate its implications for the case, Dr. Hartwell called a special conference of all the leading physicians at the institution. The picture's irregularities were first attributed to technical flaws in the equipment or development process, according to Dr. William Foster, the hospital's second most experienced doctor. He maintained that the image's unsettling nature might have been caused by visual distortions brought on by Catherine's room's peculiar lighting and potential issues with the photography chemicals. When James Thornton returned to the hospital to take control photos with the same tools, chemicals, and even the same room, this notion was swiftly disproved. Without any of the irregularities seen in Catherine's photo, the control photographs appeared completely normal. A more extreme view was put forth by Dr. Margaret Sinclair, one of the few female psychiatrists at the time. She hypothesized that Catherine might have a very uncommon neurological disorder that impacted both her mental and physical interactions with the world around her. Sinclair had read about individuals in Europe who allegedly had telekinetic powers during intense spells of psychosis. When the medical personnel thoroughly examined all of the recorded occurrences linked to Catherine, including temperature changes, impacts on plants and other people, and object movements without physical contact, this notion acquired even more support. Sinclair contended that these effects might be the result of abnormal bioelectric fields created by an unidentified brain disorder. Despite being fascinated by Sinclair's notion, Dr. Hartwell remained skeptical about science. In order to test the theory that Catherine might be generating quantifiable physical energy, he suggested a number of carefully monitored experiments. Exact measurements of temperature and magnetic fields would be part of these experiments, as would attempts to use scientific methods to take pictures of purported energy fields. When copies of Catherine's photograph were sent to additional experts in Boston, New York, and even European physicians who were at the forefront of mental study, the medical arguments surrounding her case became more heated. All of the answers were unsettling. In their decades of experience with medical photography, all of the consulted professionals concurred that the image displayed oddities they had never seen before. After looking at the picture, German psychiatrist Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann, who is well known for his research on hysteria and dissociation, wrote a thorough response. He hypothesized that Catherine might have an extreme case of multiple personality disorder, in which her physical appearance was influenced by numerous personalities that coexisted in her head but were invisible to the human sight. Even Dr. Hartwell, who had seen Catherine's declining health over the preceding months, was taken aback by how quickly her condition worsened after the June 1871 photo session. She appeared to have undergone significant physical and mental changes as a result of the photography process. Catherine started to remain in catatonic stiffness for longer and longer lengths of time. Previously lasting only a few hours, these episodes now persisted for days at a time. She did not react to any outside stimuli during these times, yet she was obviously aware of what was going on around her. She didn't speak or move willingly, but her eyes stayed open and alert, watching movement and focused on particular people. Even more unsettling was the sharp increase in otherworldly activity surrounding Catherine during these extended periods of catatonia. Even in the sweltering summer months, her room temperature often fell to the point that ice formed on windows. Things moved more violently and often, occasionally being flung across the room with enough power to break furniture and walls. When medical personnel entered Catherine's room, they started to report more unsettling events. Many claimed to have experienced acute physical feelings, including crippling vertigo and severe nausea, as well as hearing voices conversing in unidentified languages and seeing shadowy creatures moving in their peripheral vision. After months of valiantly working alongside Catherine, Sister Margaret O'Connell asked to be permanently moved to a different area of the hospital in August 1871. After the photo, Catherine's physical decline rapidly increased, and she wrote in her letter of transfer request, "I can no longer in good conscience continue working near that child. Whatever is happening to her is spreading beyond her room, and I fear for all our safety." She went through a severe weight loss, where she looked quite emaciated. Veins and tendons became distinctly evident through the epidermis as her skin turned translucent. Her hair grew quickly to an unusual length and darkened completely, turning black as coal. Catherine went into her last catatonic state in September 1871. For 6 weeks in a row, she didn't eat, drink, or talk, and she was totally still. According to medical theory, she should have perished from dehydration within a few days, but she managed to live on by sustaining essential biological systems in ways that Dr. Hartwell was unable to explain. As if seeing something others couldn't see, Catherine's gaze followed people throughout the room and sometimes focused sharply on particular places during her last weeks of life. Her lips would occasionally move slightly, as though she were whispering to an unseen person. At the age of 9, Catherine Doyle passed away early on the 2nd of November, 1871. Her death was oddly gentle, according to Dr. Hartwell, who was there. On one of the few occasions when the paranormal activity in her room had ended, she just closed her eyes and stopped breathing. For the first time in months, the room temperature suddenly returned to normal at the precise moment of her death. The questions surrounding Catherine's case continued after her death. Conversely, it exposed even more unsettling elements that would provide problems for medical professionals and researchers for many years to come. When Dr. Hartwell and a Boston colleague performed Catherine's autopsy, they discovered physical abnormalities they had never seen before. There were no indications of any illnesses or deterioration that would often result in death, and her internal organs were in excellent shape. Examining her brain revealed neuronal growth patterns that were wholly abnormal. While certain areas remained in an almost embryonic state, others were developed much beyond what would be typical for her age. Even stranger was the fact that Catherine's body didn't decay as one may have imagined after passing away. As if regular breakdown processes had been halted or drastically slowed, it persisted in amazing preservation for weeks, even without chemical preservation. There were other odd occurrences reported beside Catherine's tomb when she was eventually laid to rest at the hospital cemetery. The ground just above her tomb was inhospitable to plants. The temperature there was always colder than elsewhere, and cemetery visitors often complained of uneasy feelings as they passed by the site. For the remainder of his career, Dr. Hartwell kept researching Catherine's case, writing a number of scholarly monographs about his findings. Not because they provided solutions, but rather because they documented experiences that utterly contradicted the medical paradigms of the day, his books became essential reading in psychiatric circles. One of the most researched and contested medical records of the 19th century was Catherine's image. Copies were sent to medical schools and universities across America and Europe, where experts tried in vain to explain its abnormalities. There were other ideas put forth, ranging from unusual optical phenomena to technical flaws, but none of them could adequately account for the image's potent psychological impact on its viewer. Researchers kept going to the Danvers Hospital archives to look into Catherine's case decades after she had away. A plethora of information regarding a case that appeared to defy standard medical classification was provided by Dr. Hartwell's thorough medical records. The renowned psychologist Carl Jung looked at Catherine's portrait and related medical documents in 1923, more than 50 years after her passing. It was suggested by Jung that Catherine might have been an extreme case of synchronicity, meaningful but causally unrelated happenings. He proposed that she might have served as a focal point where psychic worlds that are often distinct came together in a way that was perceptible. The case of Catherine Doyle offers intriguing interpretive opportunities that were not accessible to physicians in the 19th century, given the state of medical and psychological research today. Several explanations have been put out by modern experts who have examined her medical records in an effort to explain her symptoms within the parameters of contemporary science. According to a well-known idea, Catherine may have had a very uncommon type of temporal lobe epilepsy, specifically a variation that affects the parts of the brain in charge of language, memory, and temporal perception. Theoretically, extreme cryptomnesia, the capacity to retrieve memories that were learned but not consciously processed, could account for her inconceivable knowledge. A neurobiologist from Harvard University who has investigated the case in great detail, Dr. Sarah Chen, said that Catherine may have had a neurological abnormality that gave her unusual access to ambient information. Chen claims that some uncommon illnesses can enable patients to process tiny sensory information subconsciously, giving the appearance of supernatural wisdom, when, in reality, they are understanding odors, micro-expressions, and other environmental cues with remarkable accuracy. The prospect of severe dissociation coupled with excessive savant syndrome is the subject of another contemporary theory. According to some scholars, Catherine may have created several identities, each with access to distinct skill sets and knowledge. Her capacity to speak languages she had never studied and exhibit specialized knowledge in a variety of fields would be explained by this notion. The physical components of Catherine's situation, however, are difficult for even the most advanced theories to fully explain. The impacts on photography equipment, temperature phenomena, and item movements continue to defy accepted scientific theory. According to some contemporary researchers, Catherine may have had bioelectric abnormalities in addition to an extreme case of what is now known as highly sensitive person syndrome. According to this notion, some persons are capable of creating unusual electromagnetic fields that have an impact on ambient temperature and even technological devices. The case of Catherine Doyle had a profound effect on popular culture, paranormal research, and psychiatric treatment. Her tale became one of the most well-known and hotly contested medical cases in history, impacting generations of scholars and igniting innumerable inquiries into the boundaries of human experience. A standard for medical documentation of unusual situations was created by Dr. Hartwell's thorough records, and it is still in use today. His methodical and analytical approach to events that resist easy explanation has affected how researchers today handle examples like these. Catherine Doyle remains a mystery that tests our comprehension of the boundaries of human experience more than 150 years after her passing. Her story illustrates an intriguing nexus between psychology, medicine, and events that might defy our current understanding. The outstanding quality of Catherine's medical records, in addition to the unusual nature of her complaints, is what makes her case so strong. Modern researchers can now analyze the case using conceptual and analytical techniques that were unavailable in the 19th century thanks to the thorough and scientifically sound record that Dr. Hartwell and his team produced. Today, when we view Catherine's pictures, we still see what the doctors of the era saw. A picture that is both recognizable and extremely unsettling. Her look conveys information that a 9-year-old child shouldn't have, and her eyes seem to hold an intelligence and experience that surpass her apparent age. Aspects of her case can be partially explained by contemporary theories, but no single theory can account for all of the phenomena that have been observed. This implies that our existing knowledge of neuroscience, psychology, and physics may still be insufficient for severe situations like Catherine's, but it does not imply that we must turn to supernatural solutions. Human experience can be far more complicated and enigmatic than our present scientific models can account for, as Catherine's case serves as a reminder. It urges us to have an open mind regarding the potential for experiences that go beyond our typical comprehension and challenges our propensity to classify and explain everything within well-known frameworks. What Catherine's example teaches us about the value of meticulous documenting and close observation of unusual occurrences may be its most significant lesson. Instead than attempting to explain what they were seeing too soon, Dr. Hartwell and his team focused on painstakingly recording every facet of the case. This method produced a priceless historical record that still influences current studies. As a visual record of one of the most remarkable medical cases ever recorded, Catherine's photo endures. Fundamental concerns concerning the nature of reality, the boundaries of human experience, and the mysteries that lie unsolved in the depths of the human mind are raised every time we view this image. Despite having only lived for 9 years, Catherine Doyle's legacy still challenges and motivates researchers over a century later. Her tale serves as a reminder that there are still many significant mysteries in the world and that certain questions may be more significant than their solutions. Subscribe to the channel if you like Catherine Doyle's story and would like to learn more about instances like this one. Antique photos that contain unsettling secrets. Macabre tales that medicine attempted to explain but was never able to fully comprehend, and historical medical riddles that defy explanation. Numerous comparable situations, such as patients from the 19th century who had unthinkable powers. Medical photos that took more pictures than were necessary, and historical riddles that have never been solved, are just waiting to be investigated. To ensure that you don't miss any of these remarkable cases that are concealed in the medical history archives, turn on notifications. Until the next gruesome tale.